Alright, everyone, settle down now. Hello, travelers. This is Professor Black. Welcome to Invokation Akademy's TCG-101 series, where we'll learn various TCG concepts through easy-to-understand 10-minute lessons. Our goal is to turn you from a third-rate duelist with a fourth-rate deck into a Genius Invocation champion. Today's lesson will be all about passing the turn, which should be pretty familiar to you as you've no doubt done this hundreds of times by now. Using a skill or swapping characters will pass the turn to your opponents, one of the most basic rules of Genius Invocation. So why dedicate an entire lesson to something like that? Well, as it turns out, there's quite a lot of strategy built into the turn system, and understanding it will help you stay a step ahead of your opponents who ignore this and simply perform actions. Do keep in mind, this is an extremely deep topic, and the lesson won't be enough to cover it nearly in enough detail. You won't become an expert overnight, but the goal is to hopefully get you started thinking more critically about passing the turn as more than just a side effect of an action. The rest will have to come with practice. So, let's end turn on the intro and pass it along to the interesting stuff. The two main ways that you pass the turn to your opponent is either by using a skill or swapping characters. You'll often hear the latter referred to as a slow swap. And the most basic way to take advantage of this is to simply break the symmetry by playing effects that ignore this rule. For skills, we have Mond Stat Resonance, currently the only card of this type in the game. This lets a character act immediately if their skill takes out one of the opposing characters. This effectively causes your opponent to skip their turn and is an extremely powerful effect, particularly in the last few rounds of the game. And there are of course several effects that let you swap a character without using an action, often referred to as quick swap. Mona has a unique passive that lets her quick swap once per round, which is a huge part of her kit and one of the main reasons to use her in your decks. Additionally, one-off cards like Leave It To Me and Anima Resonance can also provide the same effect. Quick swaps are the most common way to surprise your opponent with an unexpected reaction, taking out a key character, especially when combined with a burst. We've all been on the receiving end of a devastating quick swap at some point or another, and it should be pretty clear why this effect is so powerful. Playing around your opponent's potential for quick swapping is one way to get ahead in a duel, and something you want to start thinking about in your games if you aren't already doing so. Now, while these effects are the most obvious way to take advantage of the turn system, there's a more subtle mechanic built into it, which is that on your turn, you must perform a skill or swap to pass the turn. There's no option to do nothing and pass. This means each time you're forced to use some of your dice or cards, and if you run out of dice, then the only thing you can do is end the round. While ending the round doesn't sound so bad, it does give your opponent the opportunity to use any remaining dice without you being able to respond, which can be very dangerous, particularly if there's a lot of dice remaining. In fact, a lot of aggro decks with the potential for first turn kills rely on the opponent ending the round to set up. If you are able to respond, you can generally prevent them. Similarly, combo decks relying on one-turn kills are also looking to take advantage of this. If the opponent is able to respond, it often leaves the comboing character too vulnerable to being counterattacked and unable to safely perform the combo. It's important to be able to identify situations like this to make sure not to use up all your dice too quickly so you can continue to react to what your opponent does. Which brings us to the concept of swap stalling. You probably have seen opponents do this before, swapping back and forth between the same two characters without using any skills. And if you're continuing to use skills as normal, you'll suddenly find yourself out of dice way before your opponent. On the surface, this looks like a waste of dice, but in fact, swapping characters is the cheapest way to pass the turn back to your opponent. And in some situations, this is more important than maintaining dice advantage, and can even be the best play. In the extreme case, neither side may be willing to commit to using their dice on skills, which leads to a very weird looking sequence where both sides continually swap back and forth between characters using up dice until one player's dice count is low enough that the other person is willing to act. You're probably waiting for me to explain exactly how you can tell when swap stalling is the ideal play. Well, bad news, that topic is a little too advanced and depends heavily on what is happening in each particular game. If you want to improve, I'd recommend watching some high-level tournament gameplay and taking note of when a player chooses to swap off a character when you would have otherwise chosen to use a skill. If you can figure out why that may have been the correct play, you can start applying this to similar situations in your own games. If you want a suggestion on what to watch, I'll use this opportunity to plug the Astra Carnival channel, where you'll find great games from the Cat's Tail Gathering and Prince Cup finals. In case you didn't know, I cast regularly for the NA and English streams, and I try my best to point out these unusual lines pro players take when I see them. Even if you're not into doing that bit of homework, the most important takeaway for today is that slow swapping is an important tool to keep in mind, and quick swap is not necessarily always better. Which brings us to Katheryne. You may have noticed when we went over quick swap cards, I intentionally left her out. New players are very quick to catch on to how powerful quickswap can be, and for good reason, as you definitely lose a lot to surprise quickswaps so they stand out in your mind. So naturally, Katheryne seems like a great card. It's a repeatable source of quickswap for the low cost of just 1 die. Awesome. But hang on, we just talked about how slow swapping can in fact be used strategically. Katheryne, however, always turns your first swap into a fast swap. There's no opting out of that. While there's definitely games where the effect can be good, every now and then it can actually work against you. I've definitely played matches where the best move from my opponent would have been a slow swap, but Katheryne prevented them from making that play. Sometimes they even had to swap twice just to get around their own card. 1 die is simply too much to pay for a card that can sometimes hurt you. This is why you'll almost never see Katheryne in any tournament decks. A single, well-timed Leave It To Me can often be all you need to win the game. And before we wrap up, let's go over a couple more things to keep in mind about ending your round entirely. Ending first does give you an important advantage, which is to act first in the next round. This lets you use a skill without giving an opportunity for your opponent to respond. Ramp cards are great for this, as they let you spend dice on free actions and carry over a benefit into the next round. Just be wary of playing too many of these when your opponent has a lot of dice remaining. The closer you get to the end of the game, the more you need to be paying attention to this. Sometimes the correct play may be to end first even if you still have dice remaining to use a skill. This often comes up when playing around cards like Lotus Crisp. Going first lets you get around your opponents using Lotus while also giving you a window to use your own. Learning to identify when this is the correct play can help you win close games. One final thing to keep in mind for ending the round is that summons for the player that ended first will go first. This can matter if both players have a lot of summons that can take out characters on the other side. But when this is particularly important is any time you are playing Barbara. Her self-hydro application is extremely effective at cleansing, but if you end your turn in the wrong order against your opponent, you might just be helping them trigger an extra reaction rather than negating one. Because of this, she is a particularly difficult character to use for newer players, so make sure to keep this in mind when using her. In fact, using Barbara is a common reason to swap stall, as ending second can give you full control of elemental reactions during the end phase. That's it for today's lesson. Who knew there'd be so much to talk about for a seemingly simple game mechanic? While it's easy to understand on the surface, the intricacies of the turn system is one of the many things I love about Genius Invocation. While I hope you've learned something from today's overview, it's really up to you from here on out to learn how to apply this knowledge to your own games. And remember, faster is not always better. For more advanced lessons, why not try one of my deck labs where I do a deep dive on how to play a single deck. If there's anything you'd like to see in an upcoming video, drop a comment and I'll see how I can help. Be sure to enroll in our courses by subscribing so you can be notified when a new lesson's available. Until then, class dismissed!